A few years ago, I started working as a flight attendant with a small airline based out of San Diego, California. It was my first real job, and I was excited. The airline mostly handled short flights along the West Coast, cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. It seemed perfect for someone like me, fresh out of training and eager to see new places. Everything started normally enough. My shifts were mostly morning flights, which meant early wake-ups, but also early evenings. I lived alone in a cozy apartment near Mission Valley. My routine quickly fell into place. Early mornings, busy afternoons, then quiet evenings at home, unwinding before an early bedtime. About a month into my job, things took an odd turn. It began subtly. I noticed a passenger, a man in his late 30s named Jonathan, as I later learned, appearing on several of my flights. He was quiet, always polite, and nothing about him initially raised alarms. Frequent flyers were common. It wasn't unusual to see familiar faces on routes like these. So at first, I didn't think much about it. But after seeing him for the fourth time in 2 weeks, always on my specific flights, I began to feel uneasy. Each time, he'd smile politely, say hello, but then watch me quietly from his seat. There wasn't anything inherently threatening about him, but something about his quiet gaze felt intense, almost overly familiar. I tried to shake it off as paranoia. After all, as a flight attendant, dealing with passengers was part of my job. But soon, his presence seemed less coincidental. On a flight from San Diego to Seattle, I glanced toward his seat halfway through the flight and saw him taking a photo, pointed directly at me. When our eyes met, he calmly lowered his phone, smiled, and looked away. The next day, on a different flight, I deliberately avoided looking his way. But during beverage service, I caught him glancing over repeatedly. Each time he noticed me looking back, he would quickly avert his gaze. It felt calculated, as though he were testing how much he could get away with. My discomfort grew. I hadn't told anyone about this man yet, not my colleagues, friends, or family. Part of me was embarrassed. Maybe I was just overreacting. It wasn't uncommon for crew members to attract occasional unwanted attention. But there was something unsettlingly deliberate about Jonathan's behavior. A turning point came a week later during an overnight layover in Portland. It had been a tiring day with multiple flights, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night at the hotel. After checking into the Marriott downtown, I decided to walk to a nearby cafe for dinner. As I stepped onto the street, I glanced casually across the road and froze. Jonathan was standing under a street lamp, seemingly waiting for someone. My heart immediately began to pound. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He was probably a business traveler after all. But then I recalled he'd been on my earlier flight. Was he following me? Trying to remain calm, I crossed the street in the opposite direction and walked quickly toward the cafe, hoping he hadn't noticed me. Inside, I chose a table far from the windows and kept nervously checking outside. Halfway through my meal, the door opened and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Jonathan entered. He didn't approach me. Instead, he ordered a coffee, sat at the counter, and casually glanced my way, acknowledging me with a slight nod. My appetite vanished. I quickly paid, left the cafe, and hurried back to the hotel, constantly checking behind me. Thankfully, I didn't see him again that night, but sleep came difficultly. By now, his behavior had crossed the line. I debated reporting him to the airline, but I still felt unsure. He hadn't explicitly threatened me or done anything illegal that I could prove. Still, fear had begun to shape my days. At work, I found myself constantly scanning passengers' faces, dreading his presence. Weeks went by without seeing him, and I began to relax, convincing myself it had all been my imagination running wild. Then, on a late evening flight from Los Angeles to San Diego, I saw his face again. This time, he was in the front row, right next to the galley. I felt trapped. Throughout the short flight, Jonathan watched my every move openly. It was as if he wanted me to notice, to understand he wasn't going away. After landing, I waited until everyone else had exited, trying to avoid confronting him, but he lingered deliberately, taking his time gathering his things. Finally, as he passed me, he leaned slightly closer and said, "Have a good night. I'll see you soon." My blood went cold. His words seemed harmless, but the tone and the intent behind them felt menacing. Once he left, I stood frozen, heart racing. I realized then I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed to report him. The next day, I spoke with my supervisor, finally sharing everything. Airline security and local police became involved, but they told me there was little they could do without clearer evidence or explicit threats. Jonathan hadn't committed a clear crime, yet. The airline changed my schedule and took me off flights temporarily, hoping distance would discourage him. It seemed to help, at least at first. Weeks passed quietly, but one night, as I entered my apartment building after grocery shopping, I noticed a folded note slipped under my door. Shaking, I opened it. Inside was a single, neatly printed sentence. "You shouldn't have told anyone." My hands trembled as I stared at the words, realizing with terrifying clarity what this meant. He knew exactly where I lived. I immediately called the police, showing them the note. They investigated, reviewed security footage, but found no clear images of anyone suspicious. Again, I was left with nothing but fear. Eventually, I had no choice but to move apartments, change my contact information, and even request transfers within the airline. Slowly, I tried rebuilding a sense of normalcy, though the memory haunted me. Today, I still look over my shoulder whenever I'm alone, always vigilant, always cautious. The man called Jonathan never showed himself again, but I never shake the feeling he's out there, somewhere, patiently waiting. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. My uncle and aunt visited me in Atlanta last winter. We talked for hours about normal family things. Somewhere in the middle of that long conversation, we slipped onto the topic of strange events. My uncle is not a man who likes tall tales, so when he said he carried one memory that would stay with him until the day he dies, I opened my laptop and began to type. He nodded, smiled a little, and told me to warn anyone who reads this that it is only the voice of an old man, and that some parts might sound impossible. He started by explaining how he finished school at Fordham University in 1974. Back then, good work was easy to find. Firms wrote letters and even phoned the students asking them to come in. He did not want a life at a stuffy desk, so he waited for something that felt right. The moment came during a Thanksgiving flight to visit my aunt. While looking down at the shining dots of planes sliding across the night sky, he fell in love with air traffic control. He liked the steady voices, the moving lights, all of it. By his 27th birthday, he had passed every exam and was allowed to work without another controller standing over his shoulder. The first posting was never a choice for rookies. Instead of a famous airport like JFK or Hartsfield-Jackson, he got Atlantic, Iowa. People often confuse the Atlantic with the ocean, but it is only a small farm town. The airport there had one short runway pressed between endless rows of corn. Day workers went home at 5 in the evening, yet the tower stayed open until 4 in the morning. Many routes crossed the sky above, so a broken plane might need to drop in at any moment. My uncle sat alone in the glass room at the top, while a guard named Joe slept downstairs by the empty ticket desks. Most hours were silent. He passed long nights by reading thick paperbacks and working crossword puzzles. He also spent many nights whispering on the phone to my aunt. People like to say air traffic control is brutal on the nerves. In Atlantic, he was bored almost the whole time. Only once in a while, a tiny Cessna would call from the dark and ask for help to land. That quiet routine rolled on until the middle of February 1979. On February 20th, the wind howled through the flat fields, yet there was no snow. He was scheduled to keep watch until closing. No flights were on the board, so he expected nothing but boredom. At 1 in the morning, a small Cessna radioed from about 30 miles north. A heavy storm over Omaha forced the pilot to search for a safer strip. My uncle pulled out his binoculars, checked visibility, and started guiding the craft down. The landing looked rough in the crosswind, yet the wheels touched without trouble. He raised the glasses for one more look and froze. A woman was walking up the runway. She wore a thin summer dress, no coat, no shoes, as if the air were warm. It was below freezing. Worse, nobody could explain how she reached the middle of an active strip in the first place. Puzzled, my uncle grabbed the microphone and called the Cessna. "Do you see a woman on the runway?" he asked. The pilot sounded calm but surprised and stepped out to check. In the binoculars, my uncle watched him approach her, speak, and lean forward as she brought her mouth close to his ear. They stayed that way for 10 long seconds, neither person moving. Then the pilot snapped upright, spun, and sprinted back to his plane. The propeller spun to life. My uncle barked over the radio, ordering him to wait, but the pilot ignored every call. The little plane raced down the strip and climbed into the night. Static filled the radio. In the hiss, he caught pieces of words, then one clear command: run. The signal went dead. He leaned back, trying to make sense of what he had heard, and then remembered the woman. When he raised the binoculars again, she was facing the tower, 200 yards away. Eyes opened so wide they looked painful. With no hint of snow beneath her feet, she started running straight at him. He had weathered 6 years in Vietnam and thought fear no longer owned him. Yet something about that figure sprinting through the night sent ice through his chest. He called Joe, the guard, but no answer came. He glanced down just in time to see the front door of the tower slam open. Instinct pushed him toward the small bathroom beside the radar racks. He locked himself in. Outside, chaos exploded. Equipment crashing, drawers slamming, the quick thump of feet. Once a violent bang struck the bathroom door so hard the handle shook. Then, total silence settled. He stayed hidden until dawn's orange light leaked under the door. At 7:45, the day controller Clark arrived, cursed loudly, and opened the door for him. The control room looked wrecked. Radio panels lay torn from their mounts. Screens were smashed. Paper covered every inch of the floor. Police took statements and shook their heads. Repairs lasted 11 days. Joe was fired for sleeping on duty. Cameras were discussed, but not installed right away. My uncle convinced himself that the intruder must have been a mentally ill woman from